What up, motherfuckers? Welcome back to another video. So recently, the new Saints Row game came out, and to literally no one's surprise, the new game is pretty mid. The Saints Row series peaked with the second and third game, and it's been a downward spiral from there. I mean, the red flags have been all the way since the game was first revealed last year, with one of the worst reveal trailers in video game history. Not to mention, Epic Games' launcher exclusivity is never a good sign either. So way to go in pissing off all your negative 2 fans who probably off themselves with this game's release, realizing the chance of another classic Saints Row game is basically non-existent at this point. But I guess it's fitting that the new Saints Row game is on the Fortnite store with the game's characters looking like fucking discount default skin Fortnite characters. Now while I could sit here for 20 minutes bitching and moaning about this game's technical and creative shortcomings, instead today we'll be taking a look at a truly special video. And when I say special, I mean the short bus kind, which is fitting since we're dealing with a bunch of game journalists who are infamous for some of the worst takes in gaming, as well as sucking Gorilla Glue dick at video games. Some standouts include the infamous Dean Takahashi Cuphead video, where it got to the point of people comparing gameplay with a literal 5-year-old. But the video in question today comes from the one and only IGN, aka the Ignorant Gamers Network, with a video titled, "Why Every Saints Row sequel Should Be a Reboot." And you know, man, I truly can't contain my excitement for any longer. I mean, it's not every day that you get to bully IGN. So with all that said, let's get into this shit. Dude, what the fuck is this background music? It makes me feel like I'm in a fucking Home Depot commercial or some shit.
Good luck finding a video game series that has as batshit insane a narrative arc over the course of 4.5 installments as Saints Row does.
Okay, discount Nathan Drake. That clearly just means you haven't played enough video games. You know, let's just take a moment to name some series. You of course got fucking GTA, which the Saints Row games definitely take some inspiration from. Then there's the Far Cry series, which despite its bland game worlds, after way too many fucking sequels, their main redeeming qualities are the memorable story missions and villains. You also got Borderlands, Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil. I mean, do I really need to continue?
What began as a mostly serious game about gang warfare somehow escalated to musical numbers in hell and Satan getting punched in the face at his own wedding.
Yeah, and most people are in agreement that Saints Row Get Out of Hell is literally the worst game in the series, so I don't really get what point you're trying to make here.
Sure, why not?
You know, honestly, I prefer to be sane right now if it meant I didn't have to be watching this video, but I gotta get my views somehow.
The latest entry's new direction has fans divided ahead of launch, but regardless of what you think of this next generation of Saints, the new game offers something this series desperately needs: a fresh start.
Well, if by fresh you mean a hot turd turning out of a dog's butthole onto the pavement, like a chocolate twist ice cream cone, then you're spot on, dude. I mean, some people are comparing this game to the likes of Fallout 76 or the GTA quote-unquote remastered trilogy, which honestly I think is a bad comparison, seeing how Saints Row weather effects are 10 times fucking worse to the point of fucking blinding you.
And you know what? At a certain point, a legacy can become baggage. What if Saints Row's returning characters are what's been holding this series back from expanding and reaching its full potential?
Why the fuck would their returning characters be a problem? If anything, that'd be literal fan service for the fans. Like, what, are the writers incapable of writing characters as good as the old ones? Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case if the new Saints Row game is anything to go off by.
You might think I'm crazy, but hear me out.
I think crazy might be the incorrect term to use. I was thinking more along the lines of delusional.
Maybe rebooting the franchise with each new game could be the secret to cementing its longevity.
I mean, dude, why not just not include the old characters in a future sequel? If they're that much of a hassle if that even fucking happens thanks to this turd? Or why not just change the setting again for a new game? Like, there's more than a few cities in the real world to take inspiration from. And that way, you'll avoid having to call any more games just Saints Row. I mean, with this game, there's already 2 different games using the same name. So good luck trying to figure out which game someone is talking about from a glance.
For the most part, Saints Row fans exist in one of 2 camps. People who love that over-the-top zaniness and people who think it kind of ruined the franchise.
I mean, dude, if it gets to the point where you end up with a game like Get Out of Hell or Agents of Mayhem, which greatly derived from what the series was originally, then it's a sign to maybe tone down things a bit.
But it's not hard to pinpoint exactly when this change took place either. Saints Row the Third.
Yeah, trust me, Saints Row 3 is not a problem here. That game was good. It's what came after that's the problem. That being the developer's seemingly personal need to outdo the previous game in terms of pushing the zaniness, which eventually came back to bite them in the ass.
What the hell is the Stag Initiative?
If it's free porn for everyone, I am down.
The first Saints Row was a fairly shameless Grand Theft Auto San Andreas knockoff, but it was also a solid enough game in its own right that everybody was willing to overlook that.
Again, the first 3 Saints Row games aren't the problem here, so I don't get the need for a history lesson of the series.
To set the series apart from the competition, Volition injected the sequel with considerably more humor, which helped differentiate it from Rockstar's flagship series, especially as Grand Theft Auto 4 took things in a grittier, more grounded, and generally pretty brown direction.
Random side note, that fucking late 2000s trend of making literally every video game brown or gray was so fucking retarded, dude. Like, I guess the gaming industry was going through its edgy phase or some shit.
Saints Row 2's tonal shift from the first game is not subtle. There's an increased emphasis on customization, it's a lot more colorful, and it gets pretty silly. That said, it keeps one foot on the ground. You can still roleplay as a hardened gangster, staking your claim in the criminal underworld.
Yeah, repeating myself for like the 3rd time now, the first 3 games aren't a problem here, and you seem to agree with that fact, so you could have just focused on what came after that's the problem, but no, gotta get your videos over 10 minutes somehow. And I already know I'm gonna get some retard in the comments. Well, Lucas, your video's over 10 minutes, in fact it's 20 minutes or some shit. Wow, dude, it's almost as if I gotta add the original video I'm responding to for context. And I actually got something to say instead of just repeating myself just to get to a certain duration, where I'm able to put in more ads for that sweet, succulent ad revenue. Anyway, what the fuck were we talking about?
You know, when you're not spraying raw sewage everywhere or jumping through hoops on a flaming ATV. It's hard to say if Saints Row 2 is in fact a fan favorite or if Saints Row 2 fans are just the most vocal, but you don't have to look far to find people who say this was the high point for the franchise.
Yes, Saints Row 2 and 3 were the highlights of the series. Can we please move the fuck on? Like, Jesus Christ, how much longer are we gonna keep harping on this shit and move on? Into how it all somehow plays into how every future Saints Row game should be a reboot.
Saints Row the Third is where the series jumped the shark, deliberately and unabashedly. It actually went a step further than jumping the shark by adding a gun that shot shark attacks as DLC. The third game might not have been a reboot, but it was certainly a rebrand.
Wait, so if the whole point you're trying to make is that each game was different enough while also not going overboard with the zaniness, then why the fuck would a follow-up need to be a reboot? Why not just call it Saints Row 5 or some shit?
In addition to moving to a new city, the entire world got a fresh coat of glossy purple paint and a more stylized aesthetic that made it a bit more cartoony, but also a lot more visually cohesive.
Okay, so then by your own logic, aren't Saints Row 2 and 3 reboots if they were different enough from each other? So then if that's the case, then why the fuck do you need to call it a reboot? Like, what are you trying to argue here? Because it feels like either I'm missing something or the retardation is rubbing off on me.
The premise of Saints Row the Third was self-aware. The Saints had made the leap from a street gang to a lifestyle brand that had its own energy drink. They had sold out. The tone of the third basically acted as a meta-commentary of THQ's decadent marketing for the game, while also making that marketing totally on brand.
You know, man, I'm yet to grasp the idea of why every Saints Row sequel should be a reboot, because as of right now, I'm merely just getting a history lesson of a series I'm already somewhat familiar with.
Plus, it was kind of a nice commentary on escalation. What happens when your gang takes over the city and gets comfortable?
I don't know, man. Maybe play the game and find out. Like, I know it was just how we phrased it, but at this point it's getting somewhat difficult to commentate over a video that's just repeating itself through a history lesson that's about as effective as reading through a Wikipedia page. And it will somehow end with why every Saints Row sequel should be a reboot through the power of mental gymnastics.
The in-your-face style was received well by many, getting the attention of a whole new audience.
Okay, dude, we get that the first 3 Saints Row games were good, and it's what came after that's the issue. Please move the fuck on. We're like 3 minutes into the video and we're yet to get to the point you're trying to make.
But it was also divisive among existing fans. Saints Row the Third could have been a reboot, but instead it kind of painted itself into a corner. It simultaneously saw the return of familiar characters from the first 2 games, but it also raised the stakes to unrecognizable heights.
You know, whoever made the script of this video is really a master of saying a lot, while not saying much at all.
It was hard to take seriously because it didn't want players to take it seriously, but after becoming invested in the ongoing story established by the first 2 games, that alienated some of the fan base.
So your solution to compensate for the writer's inability to write anything worth a fuck is to pretty much throw the previous game's characters out the window and have an entirely new setting? Like, I know that's what I somewhat hinted at previously, but now that I think about it, wouldn't that just be the standard GTA formula? You know, the very game series that Saints Row has tried to differentiate itself from throughout pretty much its entire existence. I mean, earlier when you were busy giving us a history lesson, you literally called the first Saints Row game a shameless GTA San Andreas knockoff.
Fairly shameless Grand Theft Auto San Andreas knockoff.
So then, going by your own logic, to continue the longevity of the series. Instead of doing what made the series unique in the first place, they should instead just copy GTA instead of getting competent writers and developers that are able to write a story that doesn't fuck over the series later. Like, that's what I'm getting from the video so far. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, after this, they go on a rant about Johnny Gat. So with the power of editing, we'll be fast forwarding this shit.
But it's not hard to see how treatment of a character like this might sour fans who'd spent 2 games getting to know him. But don't worry, because none of it mattered. It turns out that Johnny was still alive, he was just trapped in a simulation, because aliens had taken over the Earth.
But dude, I thought you acknowledged that the game didn't want to be taken seriously. After all, isn't it the humor and zaniness that made the series stand out? Like, I've never thought of Saints Row as a primarily serious, story-oriented series. I feel like it's always been about the gameplay and shit more than anything else.
And it's up to the player to rescue him, which they do by playing through a 16-bit side-scroller recreation of the brutal murder of Aisha from Saints Row 2. Okay.
You know, someone at IGN looked at the script for this shit and said, you know, this video seems like a great idea, this will go over swimmingly. But then again, I guess you shouldn't expect much from the same motherfuckers who gave Alien Isolation a 5 out of 10, while also giving a dumpster fire like Evolve a fucking 9 out of 10. Like, they're literally going around about how Johnny Gat was killed off in Saints Row 3, or 4, or whatever the fuck, despite them literally stating earlier that he mainly acted as comic relief, and that the games are meant to be taken seriously. But putting that aside, I don't see how rebooting the series constantly over and over is the solution to, I guess, the quality of the writing or whatever.
For Johnny Gat fans who were genuinely invested in him as a character and bummed he was killed off, a spin-off where he goes to hell to fight Satan and perform musical numbers seems more like rubbing salt in the wound than a make-good.
Yeah, and for that reason, that game is regarded as the black sheep of the series. Just like the Saints Row series, this video really is all over the place. First, they started off with a history lesson, which somehow got us to a rant about a character whose main purpose was to serve as the comic relief. And from what I'm getting, their solution to fixing the writing problems with the series is to throw everything that's been established out the window and start from scratch, because fuck you, writing is hard.
There are way too many games out there that should take themselves less seriously, and just as many that should be willing to take more risks. And clearly, the team at Volition doesn't have either of these problems, and that is one of their strengths.
My guy, you literally spent the last few minutes essentially complaining about how a comic relief character wasn't taken seriously. But now it's okay. Like, dude, if you're gonna have a retarded take, at least try not to contradict yourself immediately after.
But it's not surprising that there was a mixed reaction when one of the risks that the Saints Row games took was to spoof situations that players had at one point been expected to take very seriously.
Dude, is the series meant to be taken seriously or not at all? Stop flip-flopping and make up your fucking mind. The contradictions are starting to really piss me off. And you wouldn't like me when I'm angry, for I am the incredible retard with a $50 microphone making shitty YouTube videos.
It's a delicate balancing act for a sprawling video game to tell a compelling, heartfelt story about the criminal underworld across multiple installments, while also letting the player wear silly costumes and beat people up with inappropriate objects. And really, Yakuza kinda has that market cornered, and you don't fuck with the Yakuza.
I get the feeling you don't fuck much in the first place when you're working for IGN, but it is what it is. You know, the music choice for this video really is outstanding. First, we had the Home Depot music, and now we're treated to what I'd imagine I hear in a movie that cuts to a scene in a Chinese restaurant.
Saints Row has a reputation for being wacky and over the top, but its reliance on a cast of recurring characters is one of its most unusual qualities, especially compared to its contemporaries. In terms of gameplay, everyone has a basic understanding of what you do in a Grand Theft Auto or a Far Cry game, but each new entry is treated as a standalone story rather than any kind of continuation.
Bro, I fucking knew it. They want Saints Row to take away the aspects of what made it unique in the first place and reduce it to a literal GTA clone. You know, either I'm a sidekick or I've gotten really good at detecting incoming retardation.
Both franchises have a handful of characters who show up in multiple games, like Laszlo or various members of the Herc family, but those appearances are treated as more like Easter eggs or callbacks for returning players. Despite a familiar face now and then, nobody bats an eyelash when the latest installment in one of these series shakes things up tonally.
And so for that reason, the Saints Row series should throw away all of its characters in favor of new ones that are annoying and look like Fortnite characters. Yeah, that'll go over well.
Far Cry 3 was often hilarious on a mechanical level, like when you set a bear on fire and then the bear runs into the enemy's camp and they go in the gasoline and then everything else is suddenly on fire. but the campaign took itself pretty seriously.
Cool, but Saints Row isn't Far Cry, and in comparison, Saints Row doesn't take itself seriously. I mean, you literally said so yourself earlier in the video, but we're conveniently gonna forget that fact for the sake of making some brain-dead argument.
Often going to some pretty dark places. Shockingly, there wasn't any notable backlash when the follow-up was Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon.
Yeah, because Blood Dragon is its own separate experience, which isn't meant to be taken seriously. Like, I already know they're trying to compare this to Saints Row Get Out of Hell, but the reason that shit was awful is due to the gameplay of that being extremely fucking repetitive. You literally just fly around and do a handful of activities, and there was like 6 missions in total. Like, comparing this to Blood Dragon is so disingenuous.
A neon-soaked direct-to-video lampoon of video game tropes that was initially revealed as an April Fool's joke. It didn't hurt that Blood Dragon was a budget-priced spin-off rather than a full-priced mainline entry in the series.
Well, dude, it seems like you answered your own question as to why Blood Dragon didn't receive any notable backlash. Maybe if you thought about it, instead of spewing the first thing that came to mind, we'd be able to prevent catastrophes like this video from being made.
But the conversation wasn't focused on how Far Cry was getting too silly. In fact, it's since become kind of a fan favorite, and it's even getting turned into a Netflix animated series, which will almost definitely be the best Far Cry adaptation to date.
I think you're forgetting that Blood Dragon was a self-contained experience, and it didn't affect the main Far Cry games going forward outside of an outlier like Far Cry Primal. But why the fuck are we talking about Far Cry in a video that's about why apparently every Saints Row sequel should be a reboot?
Since Blood Dragon, Ubisoft found an interesting cadence for the Far Cry series. Each numbered mainline entry since 3 has been followed by something a little offbeat. Far Cry 4 was followed by Far Cry Primal, which boldly took place 10,000 years earlier, replacing all the machine guns and flamethrowers with an entirely Stone Age arsenal.
Again, Blood Dragon and Far Cry Primal were their own standalone experiences that didn't spill over into the mainline games, unlike Saints Row, which first shout out Got Out of Hell, and then we got the atrocity that was Agents of Mayhem.
After a few bits of DLC involving a zombie outbreak, spiders on Mars, and the Vietnam War, Far Cry 5 got a semi-canonical sequel with New Dawn, which took place in a post-apocalypse 17 years after a nuclear war that was the main game's bad ending.
This video is more than halfway done, and I'm still yet to understand how every Saints Row sequel should be a reboot, just because Ubisoft has released several successful DLCs and side games.
None of these made as much of a splash as Blood Dragon, but the discourse around them was never about Far Cry deviating too much tonally. If anything, people complained about the exact opposite, that the gameplay hasn't changed enough between each game.
Yeah, the main problem with the Saints Row games is literally the exact opposite, where the games have changed too much. So there goes your entire retarded argument.
But hey, Far Cry isn't Ubisoft's only open world game where you climb tall shit to make more icons appear on your map, and one that has taken a more serialized approach to storytelling is Assassin's Creed.
I swear to God, is the rest of this video just going to be licking Ubisoft's nutsack? Like, honestly, I feel like if there's anyone here that needs a reboot, it's IGN itself if they thought this video was a good idea.
You would think that the idea of running around stabbing people in different historical periods would be enough of a hook, but the first few AC games were strung together with an ongoing story involving secret societies, shady multinational corporations, and ancient technology masquerading as biblical fruit that may or may not have been created by aliens.
This man did not just unironically use Assassin's Creed as a way to prove his point, when literally the most liked games in the series are the first few, which literally feature the same characters, and continue an overarching story just like the Saints Row series. Like, at this point, it's just embarrassing how fucking retarded this video is.
And also Nolan North for good measure. Some players ate this up and were happy to dive into additional Assassin's Creed media to uncover new lore, but in recent years that meta-narrative has been mostly backburnered, with the modern games focusing on each game's protagonist and the goings-on in their respective time periods.
Hate to break it to you, but literally most people hate the new games which feel like Witcher 3 clones, and want the series to go back to its roots. Oh, and not to mention that Assassin's Creed Valhalla literally has a DLC where the Assassin's Creed Odyssey protagonist returns. So there goes your entire argument once again. Like, I really don't know what the fuck to say anymore. This video is so bad.
At the same time, what started as a series of stealth games has broadened mechanically to become more of an action RPG with some stealth elements.
Change doesn't always end well, and like I've said before, most Assassin's Creed fans will probably prefer an experience like the old games, rather than the Witcher 3 clones Ubisoft seems to want to keep churning out.
Unsurprisingly, these sweeping changes have pissed off plenty of fans, but based on the sales figures, it doesn't seem like Ubisoft is second-guessing this new approach.
Yeah, in terms of sales, it's unlikely that future Assassin's Creed games are gonna flop, but that doesn't mean the games themselves are gonna be good. And is it quality or trying to get out of Saints Row? I mean, at this point, I don't fucking know. This video is an absolute clusterfuck.
Saints Row's strength has always been its sandbox gameplay and player freedom, which prioritizes fun above all else.
But even though you say that, you're still gonna take a game series that you yourself acknowledge isn't meant to be taken seriously. Games like Get Out of Hell sucked because the gameplay itself was about as fun as watching paint dry, and the new Saints Row game overall just fails at recapturing what made the first few games great, while also having quite a few technical problems. problems. While also restricting the game to a storefront on PC most people don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole.
Each entry pads out the bread and butter mechanics of shooting and driving with new activities, weapons, vehicles, and powers. Where it falters is making its established universe and characters bend over backwards to contextualize this gameplay.
Okay, here's a solution. Get some better writers and don't pull a cat out of hell, while preserving the gameplay loop of Saints Row 2 and 3 with some new additions. Boom, there you go, it's literally what most people want.
Saints Row the Third had some absolutely killer additions mechanically. The VTOL jet and the Spectre hoverbike would be right at home in any serious sci-fi game, and using them to zip around Steelport is a blast. Meanwhile, launching yourself or a friend into orbit with Professor Genki's Manapult is equally fun, but in a completely different, more cartoony way. And it's kinda hard to draw a line that connects a street-level gang to a high-tech paramilitary organization in a Japanese game show hosted by a giant pink cat mascot in a way that contextualizes why these things are all in the same game.
Yeah, Saints Row 4 overall was a giant bra moment, but at least it wasn't shit like Get Out of Hell, or even worse than your Reboot.
The more wacky Saints Row's gameplay has gotten, the more noticeable the shift from its earlier entries. Like in Saints Row 4, leaping tall buildings in a single bound is a ton of fun. Less fun is the mental leap required to reconcile why this series about gangbangers suddenly involves superpowers and aliens.
You know, while that may be true, I don't think the solution is as simple as scanning all of the previous characters and sending them to the chopping block just because all the writers were too high while making the previous game and now they can't figure out how to factor them in. Also doesn't help you try to use Assassin's Creed to try and prove your point, which totally fucking backfired.
If you formed an attachment to a serious game where you play as a gang member taking control of the criminal underworld, it's asking a lot for you to suspend your disbelief that over the course of 3 games, this very same gang member has gotten famous, defeated terrorists, become president, gotten abducted by aliens, and now has superpowers because their gang hacked the simulation that the aliens trapped you in.
But dude, I thought Saints Row wasn't meant to be taken seriously. Like again, which side are you on? Should Saints Row be serious or not? Make up your fucking mind, I'm gonna get an aneurysm.
It is hard enough to tell a compelling story in a genre that puts player freedom above all else, let alone one that spans multiple games, and at the end of the day, if the game is fun enough, the story takes a back seat.
Okay, so if the gameplay is fun enough, then how the fuck did you arrive at the conclusion that every Saints Row sequel should be a reboot? And more importantly, why the fuck did this video need to exist? Thankfully, this shit is almost over.
Hey, who's your favorite character from the Just Cause series? Because mine is the rope that makes all that shit fly around. When it comes to open world games, Volition is a much smaller studio than a lot of their competition.
And so that excuses them in the case they make a shitty game. I mean, you tell me, you're clearly the shining beacon of intellect here. I'm just assumed to be 17-year-old with a shitty microphone online.
But they're scrappy. Saints Row grew from an off-brand GTA to totally its own thing.
Bruh, no. The new Saints Row game looks and feels like a threesome between Watch Dogs 2, GTA, and Fortnite. And let me tell you that as good as that might sound to some, the execution is abhorrent.
This next game, it's hopefully once again reinventing, or at least solidifying what that thing is.
Well, dude, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the new game is less than stellar, to say the very least.
And I don't want the series to stop there. Every town has a 3rd Street, so every 3rd Street might as well have its own gang of saints. Maybe they're gangbangers, maybe they're celebrities, maybe they have superpowers, maybe they're a bunch of hipster millennials whining about student loans.
Yeah, dude, who wouldn't want to play as a bunch of millennials whining about student loans? That make meta Redditor jokes, doesn't that just sound great?
But I don't want them to wear out their welcome or stretch themselves too thin. Side note, is there an age requirement to be a saint? Because if Rockstar isn't going to make a new Bully game, somebody should meet that demand.
Unfortunately, that ain't happening probably ever. Seeing how Rockstar is still too busy milking the teats of GTA Online instead of making any new games. And before you say that they made Red Dead 2, let me remind you that that came out like 4 years ago now. They've completely abandoned the online portion of that game.
Anyway, if you want more Saints Row, check out the review for the new game. I have no idea what we're giving it because I'm recording this before it's written.
Maybe next time you should go do that before you go ahead and make an absolutely dog shit 10-minute video just because.
And if you want to check out some of the stuff you can do in that game, I almost guarantee you we put up a montage of a bunch of silly shit messing around in the open world. For everything Saints Row and GTA and probably not Bully, keep it right here on IGN.
Yeah, thanks, but no thanks, I'm more than fucking good. But that's where the video ends, which thank fuck, because there's only so much IGN game journalism I can stomach for one day. In fact, I think I'd rather get hit by a car again. Yes, I said again. Not sure if I ever said this before, but when I was 9 years old, I was at the receiving end of a car that delivered the Six Flags experience. Now that I think about it, I probably sustained some sort of brain damage, which led me into making YouTube videos. Because no normal human being would willingly subject themselves to shit like this. Oh well, at least if I'm lucky, I'll probably get a few hundred views after a few days. But in conclusion, every Saints Row sequel should be a reboot, because Ubisoft games exist. Yeah, case closed. Okay. But that'll be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, as well as following me on Twitter. But with all of that said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.